a ghost lives on 17th Street.
In Sector 50, the children speak of a legend, a ghost that moves in silence, unseen by most, feared by all.
Do not look into the ghost's eyes, or you will be caught in your lies.
I realized it then. I cannot feel what others call emotions. I see a world others cannot.
What if emotions were more than just feelings?
My world is bursting with color.
Don't let it touch you!
Everyone fears the black rain, but for me it makes everything easier.
The story starts by showing us some slums and some kids running around. Two of them look up as they notice something. It's none other than a golem walking toward them. Some of the kids start telling the golem to hurry up and trade with them so they can get some food. Somebody explains that there is a golem inside of Sector 50, and nobody knows where it came from or who the owner is. But what's important is that if you give it junk, it will give you food. The golem's eyes flash red and then it looks over, turns around, and walks away. The kids yell, saying that yesterday it took a flashlight, but sometimes it just doesn't give you food. The kids wonder why it's not taking it, and we see another boy watching from up top while his friend is trying to tell him that it will retaliate if he attacks it. He also warns that there have been incidents of golems entering the street and killing people. The boy looks curious, then leaps off his pile of junk, landing right in front of the golem. He then starts to take off his backpack strap, telling the golem to take it. The golem's eyes flash red, and it gently grabs onto the bag, lifting it over its head and pouring it into its mouth like the Iron Giant. Everybody wonders why it's only taking his items again, and why it's taking this much. The golem then starts dispensing a ton of food into the kid's bag as replacements. The rest look jealous, saying that it doesn't make sense, and they wonder how he gets that much every single time. That would be enough for about 3 days. They even talk about jumping him, but one of them starts talking as we learn that he has the nickname of the Ghost of 17th Street. It then jumps to that exact street, which is also part of Sector 50. As we see the boy entering an alleyway, we see him continue walking, but we can hear that he's not alone, as there are multiple footsteps behind him. He realizes there are 7 people, and he tells them to show themselves, asking how long they're going to follow him. We learn that the boy's name is Ray, and they say he sure does have some good senses since they were following him pretty carefully. We see some kid with brass knuckles. We learn that the kid's name is Ron. Ray says that he warned him last time that if he showed himself in front of him again, he'd make sure he could never walk. Ron laughs, asking if he really thinks that he'd just let him leave like last time. He tells Ray to just put the fries in the bag, bro. If he does that, they'll let him go safe and sound. Ray calls him a liar, saying that he won't just let him go. There's a saying among the children here. A ghost lives on 17th Street. A white ghost that travels silently and expressionlessly, and you can never ever look into the ghost's eyes, or else you will be caught in your lies. Ron's hands start to tremble, and he decides to mask his fear with rage, charging in and calling Ray arrogant, saying that he'll make sure he won't even be able to say something like that ever again. Ray dodges his punch, sticks out his foot, tripping Ron. He then pivots to his side, grabbing Ron by the back of his shirt and following up with an instant punch to the gut. Ron gets the wind knocked out of him and falls backward to the floor while the other kids scream out his name. They realize that they can't let their boy lose like this, and they decide that they have to fight him together, all charging directly toward Ray. One of them leaps into the air with a bat, and Ray ducks underneath it, replying with an elbow straight to the face as the attacker is sent backward. Another kid runs in to check on him, only to get caught again. Blood flies, but of course Ray doesn't sit still. He capitalizes on their confusion, charging in with a flying knee. He then turns, looking toward the last kid with a cold expression. The kids start screaming as they continue getting beaten. After the fight is over, Ray says that just bringing more people will never change anything. Ron is afraid of him now, calling him a monster and saying that he shouldn't come any closer. Ray says that he told him before that he'd make sure he could never walk again. We see Ron actually holding a knife behind his back, and he swings it forward, calling Ray a monster and saying that he shouldn't come any closer. Ray looks down at it, seeing that his hand is trembling, and he says that monster might be a pretty good description. He says that when he was around 10 years old he figured out he was different from other people. We see his leg all scraped up, and some other kids wonder why he's not crying and if his leg doesn't hurt. Ray just wonders why he would cry if it hurt to begin with. There was another time when one of their friends was attacked by kids from 7th Street, and they wondered why Ray wasn't angry. Of course, Ray didn't know why he would be angry to begin with. One of the boys died and everybody was crying. Except Ray, who sat there emotionless. Everybody said there was something wrong with him, and that he was so scary that they decided to leave him alone. That was when he realized it. He cannot feel what other people call emotions. He wonders if he's in the wrong, and if he wants to be like everybody else. Many wondered if he would ever learn what emotions truly were. Even now, 6 years later, he still cannot feel them, but he does know how to read others' emotions. Ray then tells Ron that not using blades is an implicit rule here, asking if he really brought that because he planned on stabbing him with it from the start. Ron says that he picked it up from the garbage can earlier. Ray can tell he's lying, as there is a purple aura around the kid's chest. He says that he can tell by looking at the color of the vessel within his chest. He can see a world that others cannot. All people have a small vessel within them, and when they feel certain emotions it fills. Mana fills these vessels. The likes of anger, hate, and love result in red mana. Ridicule and apathy result in blue. Joy and excitement are yellow, and there are countless other colors. His world is riddled to the brim with all these different types of mana. What a pretty scene. Ron is still shaking, faking, saying that if he comes any closer he'll stab him for real. Now that we get a closer look, we see that it's a deeper black mana, and Ray says that is intense fear. He starts to slowly walk toward Ron, who tells him to stop moving. Ron stumbles backward until he hits a wall, and his eyes start to go almost completely white as he shakes with fear. Ray says that a liar like him deserves punishment as he sticks out his hand toward him. It then jumps to somewhere else. As Ray is walking underneath the bridge, he makes his way toward a shelter and enters. One of the kids calls out to him, and we learn that the kid's name is Pale, the leader of the Underpass children. The other kids start hugging Ray, saying they are glad that he is here. Pale says that they should check all of their earnings for today. As all of the kids put out what they have found and earned, we see they don't have much. Even Pale doesn't know if they can split this among 7 people to begin with. Ray shows them everything he's gotten from the golem, and they say they expected as much from him. Amazed that he could get it to trade with him when the golem ignored everything they tried, Ray explains that the golem only takes magic items with residual mana, which cannot be seen by those without the ability. Pale says that now they can actually split the food, and thanks to Ray, they won't have to starve today. He starts with the youngest, Josephine, and continues down the line with each of the kids. Ray decides to walk out the back, thinking about how they have never had enough food for everyone, and wondering if he will have to go to the warehouse. He has a duty to support this group, as he owes them his life. 1 year ago, we see him covered in snow, and some kids run over, seeing him there. They do their best to get him out of the snow, and he recalls how he had thought it would be fine to die like this. But the kids see he is actually alive, and feel genuinely relieved. He says that he will always repay his debts, whether through favor or vengeance. Pale calls out to him, and Ray looks up. Pale tells him that he has to receive his share too. Ray nods and says that he's not actually hungry, turning his head. His stomach rumbles, and Pale says that his stomach seems to disagree. He breaks some cracker thing in half, offering it to Ray, and asks if he can tell that it's raining black right now. He explains that it's said the mages used a lot of magic in the world, causing the mana to affect the weather. Maybe mana-less things have no color. Apparently, mages live in lower-numbered sectors much differently than those in the slums. Pale is sure that the golem is something sent by a mage, while Ray suggests it could just be a machine. But Pale insists that magic keeps it in motion. His eyes full of hope and joy, Ray admits that he actually agrees. When the golem moves, it draws the surrounding mana to its core, mixes it within, and expels it as black gas. He can't help but think there's a connection. Of course, what's more important is something else. He starts to sit up, and Pale asks where he's going. Ray says he's heading out for a bit. Pale warns that there's a lot of black rain, but Ray says it's fine and tells him to watch the river carefully so it doesn't overflow. Ray then runs off, and Pale sighs, saying Ray just does whatever he wants. We see him on the corner of 17th and 18th Street. He says that when it rains, everyone stays indoors, believing that even a single drop of black rain can make them sick. But Ray runs through it anyway, shielding himself from the rain using a light blue aura. He heads to 18th Street, specifically the Limp-Foot Hector ration warehouse. As he stands before it, he sees a bunch of workers inside gambling and says that they always gamble on rainy days. He sneaks in under the fence and moves some bricks from the bottom of the wall. Thanks to this, security is lax. He enters, saying how dark it is and sensing the presence of hundreds of different kinds of mana in the air. Drawing in specific colors, he mixes them according to the right formula, forming a reddish glow. He then creates small flames in his hand, brightening up the area. He says although he doesn't know the exact principles, he can use this very well. Still, controlling red mana feels harder for some reason. Though he wonders if he can start fully sensing the emotions tied to it, he wonders if he will be able to create a larger fire. A knife then begins to fly toward him, and he narrowly dodges it as it grazes his ear. It sticks into the wall behind him, and we hear a man saying a little rat has finally shown up and is trying to get all of their rations. And he's faster than I thought, the man says. Ray wonders if they were hiding behind a pillar or a box from the beginning. They start laughing, saying that he should struggle as much as he wants, and he realizes there are 3 of them, and they know his exact position. He never expected they had equipment like night vision goggles. But of course Ray doesn't need them. One of the men raises his knife into the air and starts to throw it toward Ray. Behind the box he sees them flying toward him, and he starts darting in, zigzagging to avoid them as they fly directly over his head. He's closing the gap. They're surprised, wondering what the hell this kid's deal is. His friends just say he should aim better, but he tries telling them that's not it, that he actually dodged them. Ray then hits him in the face and the dude falls over. The rest freeze up, asking how the hell he can see them. Ray starts to look with his eyes, saying that they are filled with rage and surprise as he's looking at the vessels in their chests. They tell him not to act tough as they come in with a swing. As he raises his hand, he swings it down, throwing the knife. Ray says that by reading the flow of mana from the vessel through the arteries, he can guess their next move before it happens, and dodge preemptively. We see him dart off the ground, flying in with a kick hitting the dude directly in the neck. The other guy says that's impossible. Ray tells him that he's wrong as he flies forward, hitting him straight in the gut as well with a punch. The dude falls to his knees, and he's now dealt with all 3 of the warehouse employees. But then the door gets kicked open by a much larger man, and he says that he came to check because it was getting rowdy. Ray says this is the Hector Group's executive named Humphrey. Humphrey says that it looks like all 3 brothers were taken out, and he lets out a long-winded sigh, saying that he's going to have to teach this little rat a lesson. There's an ominous purple lightning behind him. Ray says that Humphrey is as intimidating as the rumors, and he needs to get out of here. He starts to run in, closing the gap, rearing back his fist and hitting Humphrey straight in the gut like he did the other dude. But Humphrey doesn't even look fazed, telling him that it's his turn. Ray looks up, surprised, only for Humphrey's hand to come down toward him. Ray sidesteps it, saying that he is fast as hell, even though he's so big. Ray then leaps backward to distance himself, and Humphrey says that he's pretty fast. Ray realizes he's on another level. As Humphrey comes in with his fist reared back, he swipes at Ray again. Ray says he instinctively knows that winning against somebody like this head-on is going to be almost impossible, so he needs to find some other way out. He dodges underneath one of the attacks, saying that the only choice he has now is to infer his openings when he has his guard down. He then rears back his fist. This time, it starts to glow red as he is imbuing Monet into it, and he puts it up to Humphrey's chest as it starts to burn him. Humphrey then realizes that it was just a distraction so Ray could run away, and now he's lost him. Some other people say that he fought Humphrey, so he can't have gotten far, and that they need to find him. They start searching all over, and Ray realizes that they've got him trapped and are going to find him at any moment. He then spots something that he can use to get out of this. Other guards realize it, saying that he's near the entrance. They start running away from where Ray is as he climbs up onto the fence, leaping over it, saying that he has looted the infamous Hector Group's warehouse. They'll kill him if they find him, but he's not really afraid of dying. What he's afraid of is that if he's gone, those kids will not last very long without him. The Underpass family needs him, and that means he won't be able to repay his debt. One of the men yells, saying that he's right here, and starts to run after him. Ray turns, seeing him, and realizes that he has to continue hauling cheeks. He keeps running while the rest are in hot pursuit, and he ends up running into a complete dead end. As he comes to a standstill, they ask why the hell he's so quick. They tell him there's nowhere to run anymore, and he should come out here and spit out what he stole before they poke a hole in his stomach. He doesn't see Humphrey, which means he can still beat both of these dudes because Humphrey is the only one he truly needs to worry about. One of them leaps in, asking him if he's deaf, and swings toward Ray. Ray pushes his arm away, deflecting it, and returns with an uppercut straight to the chin, causing the dude to spit out blood as he starts to fall to the ground. His buddy starts to come in to retaliate, but Ray begins to imbue aura into his hand, grabbing onto the guy's wrist, confusing him on how he's so strong. While doing this, he starts to imbue lightning in his other hand. He raises it directly up toward the dude's face and starts zapping the absolute hell out of him, making him scream. The man then falls to the floor after having been hit with a fantasy taser. Some other people say they heard noises over here, and that this is where they've got to be. Ray realizes there's no end to them and says that it's not like he can use magic indefinitely. He spots a garbage bin, saying that place might be good enough, and he jumps into it. They completely run past him, saying they can't lose this chance to stop him. After he hears their footsteps fading away, and since they didn't find him in here, he might as well take this chance to sleep in here for the night. He holds the knife up to his stomach, saying that if they follow him to the bridge, the kids will be in danger too. The rain continues pelting on the garbage bin, making a loud sound, and he wonders when it will end. He starts to close his eyes and fall asleep. The next day the rain is gone and he sees a crack of light from the bin. He says that he fell asleep and that there should be nobody here by now. But then we hear one of them saying that they found him, which startles him. He turns to see the dude standing in front of him. The guy says it's a good thing he came back and starts looking at his vessel to see what he's feeling. Of course, based on the color, he is extremely angry, and Ray still hasn't fully recovered yet. The guy starts to grin evilly, saying that since he has a knife it must mean he wants to handle this like a man. He then leaps forward, saying that he won't hold back. He raises his knife up behind him, saying that he's going to kill him here. He swings toward Ray, but Ray sidesteps. Of course, the guy expected this, as he instantly turns with a counter swing, almost catching Ray lacking. He grazes his hair, and Ray realizes now that he's lost his balance. The dude tells him goodbye and starts to swing down toward Ray. But as he gets to his eye, we hear a very loud bang, and even the birds start to fly. Ray now has blood on his face, and the dude just got hole to the back of his skull. As he falls over to the ground, we see a man with a gun standing before him. He tells Ray that was pretty dangerous while smiling. He then starts to light up a cigarette and puffs out the smoke, asking why he created such a mess so early in the morning. This is the boss of 17th Street, Niles. Ray asks if somebody called for Niles, saying that he's not usually awake this early. Niles says, yep, and that he heard Hector's guys were on the prowl, so he came to check it out. He then looks at Ray's jacket, asking if he stole that all from Hector, and calls him bold. Ray thanks him, and Niles tells him that was not actually a compliment. Ray says it was pretty difficult, and people like Niles are hard to deal with. There are people like him, people whose emotions are so monotonous that their vessel never really fills up. Niles tells him he's going to die at this rate, and that he can't touch certain people. Ray says if he doesn't he's going to starve anyway. Niles sighs, saying that he's repaid him for saving him now. Ray says that he fished him out of the river because he thought he was supplies and never intended to help him. Niles laughs, saying that he did live thanks to him anyway. Ray says he already paid him back for that. We get a flashback to 1 year ago when he happened to pull him out of the river. He was apparently an executive of the 46th sector but was betrayed. He doesn't think Niles was lying about that, and the lessons on how to fight that he gave him as repayment were quite structured. Ray says that there's something he wants to talk to Niles about because he mentioned it before. Niles asks what it is, and Ray says it was about him joining an organization and that he wants to join Niles. If he joins his organization, the kids will be safe. Niles thinks about it, turns away, and begins walking, propping himself on a corner. He starts to light up another cigarette and says that he knows Ray can use magic. Ray is startled that he knows about it. Niles says that his guess was true, and he thought he had seen it wrong when he lit a fire without a lighter. Ray asks what he knows about magic in the first place, and Niles says only a few things. He asks a magician from his previous organization. He knows that there is mana in the air, which is used for magic, and that there are only a handful of people who can detect and use it. Ray asks if they mentioned anything about color, and Niles says that he has no idea what he's talking about, and he said you couldn't even see mana. Ray looks up at all the beautiful colors in the sky, wondering what exactly he is seeing. He asks if that's really all, or if he's forgetting something. Niles asks if he's trying to get hit and swings at him, but Ray dodges it. Ray asks what he thinks about his request to join, and Niles says no. Ray asks why he's being rejected, and Niles thinks about it. We learn that all sectors are along the Elton River. If you go up the river, you will arrive at the other sectors, and you can probably escape the slums and find a better life there. Anyways, it would be too much of a waste for a kid with such abilities like Ray to rot away here. He asks if he's ever thought about leaving Sector 50, saying that he could even find him a car. Ray says no, and he knows that he takes care of the kids here. Niles says that he's going to start an orphanage, and that he's going to snatch orphans like Ray off the street. Ray can't tell if he's lying or not because his colors are so thin, but he's probably telling the truth since he has always kept his word. Ray then tells him that he is preparing for war, it seems like, as he saw him receiving truckloads of weapons. Niles says that he knows and starts shaking his finger at him, reminding him that he shot that last dude. Ray explains that using live rounds in any form of conflict here is a definitive declaration of war. Ray says that the people in the stores will suffer if he loses the war, and he thought that his organization's protection fees were actually somewhat reasonable. Niles says that it only seems that way because there are a lot of people worse than him, and to stop treating him like he's old and not even married. Ray says that he has unstatus though. Niles swings at him, but of course Ray dodges it, and somebody pulls up in a car, telling Niles they got to go. He opens the car door for him, and Niles tells Ray that it's going to be a war zone, so he has to find another hideout, and then throws something telling him to take this. Ray catches it and looks into it, asking what this is, and Niles tells him to sanitize his ear, pointing to where he got cut, and then they drive away. Ray holds onto it and watches him leave, and his eyes actually look a bit lit up. Scene jumps to 17th Street near the Central Square, and we see Josephine with an older lady calling up to Ray, asking why he didn't come back yesterday. She runs up to him, only to notice that he's all in tatters, asking why he looks like this, and asks if he fought and starts crying. Ray says it's nothing, he just fell. Josephine continues crying, saying that it must have hurt, and Ray finds it fascinating that a single person can feel so many emotions at once. He tells her to take this and head to the tent first, and he'll be there to talk to Pale soon. Josephine says okay and runs off. We learn that the old lady's name is Viola, and she asks if Josephine told her anything. She says she's actually blind, and she's a storyteller. She says that she was just telling her about the rainbows. Ray says that she shouldn't tell the kids about that, and they won't get used to the streets if she keeps telling them about those fantasies. She asks, who's going to hold the fantasies if not the children? Ray's looking at her vessel, wondering what exactly that emotion is, as he sees a super bright purple mana, and it's never been seen in anyone besides her, so it makes him very curious. He says that she should move to another street, as there's going to be a war here soon, and he walks away. She calls him a kind child. The next morning he heads to some kind of inn or something, banging on the door, saying he's here for a delivery. The guy opens, saying that Ron was talking about how he was going to be in charge of deliveries now. Ray asks if that's really the case, but of course he knows Ron won't be around because his legs are both broken. He asks if the shopkeeper is not going to evacuate, and if he's not going to receive any customers if a war starts. He asks where he would even go if he didn't stay here, and the war might not happen. Ray asks what he means, and he says that Hector and Niles were talking in the back room, and if things work out there won't be a war. The door opens and we see a man walk out with Humphrey behind him and a hefty protagonist. We are introduced to the 18th Street boss named Hector. Bro's got some scars on his face. He looks surprised and he spots Ray, asking why a kid is working when all the adults have run off. He pats Ray, saying that was good work and that's how you make it in this world. He gives him some money, telling him to use this to buy himself a treat, and he and his boys start to leave. Humphrey turns back, glaring at Ray as he's suspicious, and he spots the bandage on his ear. He immediately turns toward him, and Ray pulls up his hood more, saying that he recognized him. Humphrey continues glaring at him, and Hector asks what he's doing. He says it's nothing and he starts to leave and they drive off. Ray says he definitely recognized the wound on his ear, wondering why he left without saying anything. The shopkeep runs in asking Niles how it went, and we see Niles with a cigarette in his mouth, saying that the negotiation has actually failed, and there's going to be a full-blown war here soon. The shopkeeper asks if he's serious, and Niles says that he can't accept such ridiculous terms, like them wanting to absorb his organization, and that this is the worst outcome. The man says that it's not his fault, and he won't be able to open the store for a while now. Ray looks like he's thinking about something. We see him walking out of the store, saying that he won't be able to walk around if war breaks out, and that he needs to get as much food as possible for all of this. A car starts to speed by him, and we see it's none other than Humphrey driving. He says he's never seen a car like that in Sector 15, and he finds it suspicious, so he needs to follow it and investigate. It jumps to the 18th Street entrance to the Hector group, and everybody's bowing respectfully at the car that Humphrey pulled up in. They tell him that they've been awaiting him as they open the door, and we see a man step out. The only thing they call him is Mage. Bro is dripped out. Ray wonders who he is, saying that he's got a dark blue, almost black mana, and it's a ridiculously large quantity of it as well. It looks the same as the mana of golems when they move. There are these rings around his vessel that he has never seen anyone have before, but they look fascinating. There's a lot of mana around the rings themselves. It's like he's using those rings to keep the mana from escaping. He realizes that man is dangerous, so he needs to warn Niles. Back at Niles' group, we see them unloading tons of guns and ammunition, moving it around, and they're all in a panic. They're all getting real busy. Ray runs up, calling out to a man, asking where Niles is, and the guy startles, asking how he got in here. Ray says the gate was open and asks where Niles is. The guy says he forgot this kid was pretty much a cat. Then he says the boss went out to prepare for the war, and it's dangerous, so he needs to get going. Ray says he needs to tell this to Niles then, and while he can't tell him about the mana, he needs to tell him to be wary of a man with a monocle on Hector's side. It then jumps to the underpass as all the kids are sleeping soundly, besides this one who is going to grow bald really early. Pale says he hopes the war doesn't drag on, and Ray says that it'll all end in a week. Pale asks who he thinks is going to win, and Ray says he doesn't know. The two groups are pretty equally matched, but Niles has to win for the sake of the children's safety. If Hector wins this war, all of these children will be sold off as slaves. Pale says the war must have begun by now, and all they hear is a massive explosion, which startles both of them. Pale looks worried, asking if he heard that, and Ray says he did, and they've never heard anything like this before. Ray says this is weird and something is wrong. Scene jumps to 17th Street as they are spraying the hell out of their guns. We see them tensed up, looking worried because what they're fighting is none other than the golem. And it didn't even leave a dent. They wonder what's going on with it. All of a sudden, the golem raises his hand as a dark bluish aura starts to wrap around it. It fires out an absolute gigabeam towards the two of them. One guy manages to escape, but homie lost the entire upper half of his body. The other guy is now painted in his blood, asking what the hell this is, as the golem stares down at him menacingly. The guy starts to shake as it stretches out towards him and rips this man apart, splitting him in two. The blood starts to fly out, hitting an umbrella, and we see the man with the monocle saying that this place smells like the sewers. The golem starts to walk back towards him, and he tells his creation to clean up everything here. The sounds continue to get louder and louder, and Pale is worried. Ray starts to raise his cloak and Pale grabs onto him, asking where he's going, saying this is different from usual, and if he's going to go, they need to do it together. Ray says he needs to wait here, and one of the kids walks out asking why they are still awake. Pale apologizes, asking if they woke them up, telling them to go back to sleep, and they do exactly that. Ray then calls out to Pale, and Pale says he understands, and he'll stay with the kids since he can't leave them alone. But he shouldn't go out too far and should come back when he figures out what's going on. Ray says he'll be back soon. Scene jumps to the entire city on fire as Ray's walking around, seeing nothing but corpses strewn out along the ground. As he's walking through them, he walks up to the guy he talked to earlier at Niles' camp, asking what's going on here. The guy calls out to Ray, and Ray asks what happened. The dude says those bastards brought a golem with them, and the man with the monocle controlled it. He does not have a lower body. He says they weren't enough against them, and he tells Ray to run away with his dying breath as his entire body goes limp. Ray stands there, looking at this man's corpse and thinks about doing the right thing. He closes his eyes, picks up a knife and looks around at all of them, just absolutely slaughtered on the floor. He says at this rate, Niles' group will lose, and he needs to go help Niles. At the same time at the underpass, we see Pale bleeding from the head, holding on to one of the kids, while the others look as if they have already been murdered. We see Pale looking absolutely depressed as the golem raises up its hand, shooting out a beam, and Pale's words are him calling out to Ray, begging that he does not return to the underpass. At the 17th Street Central Plaza, and Ray is looking around, realizing that he was late, as they're all corpses of Niles' men. But he doesn't see Niles' corpse anywhere, so he must still be alive. He then hears a massive explosion behind him, and he turns, realizing where the direction is, and he starts running directly back because it's none other than the tent. We see the beam has gone off on the underpass, and Ray comes to a stop, gasped out, looking down at the golem after it just obliterated everybody that he could call family. Ray's heart starts to sink, but of course he doesn't know what this feeling is because to him emotions are foreign. He leaps off and we see his eyes full red. This might be the first time he's ever felt rage. The golem turns instinctively, feeling the mana hitting him straight in the stomach, and Ray spits up blood as he gets sent flying into a wall. Ray lands beneath it, saying that he's going to have to make sure that everybody's safe. He then sees something and is absolutely horrified as he starts recalling the first time he met them and how the tent was before he left. Every single time he came, they were super happy to see him, and they'd always call him Big Bro. They treated him like a real family member even though he wasn't. He starts to have an image of Pale saying that he didn't want him to come back. Maybe it's because he didn't want him to see this sight, as all of their corpses are strewn out along the floor with blood everywhere. He starts calling out to them. Lorraine, Leah, Corden, Miles, Josephine, and Pale. He sticks his hand out and it's shaking. He says he hasn't repaid them for what they did to him. The golem makes its way towards him, and he starts to hear an odd sound. It's the same thing he heard during the battle before. It's the golem charging up its beam. He realizes now that it was the golem that killed them all. It killed all the Underpass children, Niles' men, and all the other people in the street, and that he will make sure to avenge all of them. So he has to move out of the way. His legs are shaking because he's seriously injured from that attack, and he's yelling, telling himself to move before the golem's attack is unleashed. We see a car fly straight into it, which surprises him, as the car actually sends it flying into a nearby wall. Niles hops out of the whip asking if he's okay and runs over to Ray, saying it looks like he doesn't have any broken bones, and that's a relief. Ray tells Niles that this is bad and that all the children are gone. When Niles looks up, he sees the same mess that Ray saw with their corpses all on the floor. He tightens his fist and apologizes to Ray, saying that it's because he was too late. Ray asks him why that would be his fault, and Niles starts to feel heartbroken and holds on to him tightly. Ray hugs him as well. After a bit, Ray asks about his subordinates, and Niles says they're all dead, that Hector called a mage from the outside. Ray asks what the plan is now, and Niles says he'll return to the street and look for survivors for now. Hector, but before he can finish his sentence, he gets hit with a special beam cannon to the chest, and his blood flies all over Ray's face. Ray looks behind as the golem is standing there with its hands still smoking. As it turned out, the car only delayed it. Ray calls out to Niles as Niles is still processing what happened. He begins to cough up blood and even starts to laugh, saying damn, and then falls over. Ray catches him, and Niles' breathing starts to get fainter and fainter. Ray holds on to him, calling out to him, asking if he's still there, wondering what the hell just happened. Ray's heart starts to beat. He recalls all of the moments he spent with Niles, such as when they were training together, when they'd eat snacks, and how he just treated him as if he were a father or older brother figure. Ray's heart is completely on fire now, filled with rage, and he stands up before the golem as the golem prepares another attack. Ray's eyes are completely red. He yells, saying he's going to kill all of them. Ray raises his hand up towards the golem and starts to prepare his own attack and retaliation. As the golem is charging, Ray is charging as well. The attacks collide with one another, creating a giant white light from the initial contact, and then it changes into their red and blue auras clashing, trying to push the other one back. Ray says that he's different from the golem, and that he actually is a human with emotions. As he's staring into its eyes, his red, fiery aura starts to push it backward, and he completely evaporates the golem's attack. It looks as if he sent a giant fire tornado. The golem gets destroyed as we see it break into pieces. Ray looks content with the outcome as we see the aftermath, the attack leaving scorched earth behind. He shakes Niles, telling him to wake up, and his eyes look worried, saying that he can't have him die here. Niles tells him to stop shaking him, saying that he's already in pain as it is. Although he was sure he'd never get a peaceful death, he didn't think that that would be today. He has no regrets though. He's accomplished a lot for someone who started as a bottom feeder. But if he had struggled a little bit earlier, maybe things would have turned out differently for him. Right around Ray's age was when things started to change for him. Ray tells him that he's going to go bring him some medicine from the car, and Niles grabs onto his hand and smiles, telling him that he should leave this place. As his vision starts to fade out, he tells him to go somewhere better. He's always thought of him as a little brother, and he hopes that he swims upstream, that he doesn't get caught up in the rapids, and that he seriously gives it his best effort by putting his feet forward and making the most out of his life. He tightens his grip as much as he can until it fades out completely, and he goes limp, dying on the spot. Ray sees that he's no longer breathing, and he starts to feel overwhelmed with emotions. He starts panting heavily, and then full-blown screams, saying that rage and despair were the first emotions that he had ever felt. We see him sitting there under the bridge of sleep until he finally wakes up because of the sunlight. His arm is still hurting, and he says that it felt like he had a really long dream. Just remembering everything that happened the other day puts his emotions in turmoil, almost the same as that time, and he is certain that something is different within him now. As he tightens his grip on his chest, he pulls it away, revealing fiery flames, and it's way more robust than before. He says, "The stronger the rage, the stronger the flame I can conjure," and that the strength of his emotions does affect the strength of his magic. He then starts to get a headache and realizes that he's overdone himself. He looks over at all of the corpses of the children and Niles as he has covered them up. He says it's time to move, and that he needs to get revenge, whether it be good or bad. He'll do whatever it takes. It jumps to the central square of 17th Street, and Niles' men are telling people to get a move on, carrying the corpses. We see the shopkeeper from before saying that the Hector group won, so life's going to get more difficult. The other dude tells him to lower his voice because they'll hear him. We see Hector propped up against his car, and Ray has a knife in hand. Hector says that if only that bastard Niles listened to them. Ray starts to imbue the magic with his aura, saying that he finally found them. We hear Humphrey put his hand on his shoulder, telling him to just wait a second. Ray turns with the blade in hand, slicing his throat, and we see it leave a cut. Humphrey distances himself, telling him to calm down, but Ray understands that Humphrey works for Hector, that everybody who is a part of that group needs to die. He charges in and starts cutting the hell out of Humphrey. And Humphrey wonders, what's with these insane movements? The kid wasn't this strong just a couple days ago, and at this rate he's going to end up losing. He realizes what he must do, and gets stabbed in the shoulder by Ray, but Ray says that he let him do that on purpose. Humphrey grabs onto him by the collar and slams him into the floor, asking if he would really choose to die over something as trivial as revenge. He says Ray's name, telling him that he has an offer for him, and Ray looks a bit curious. Humphrey says that he's been watching him for a long time now, and as such he'd like him to hear him out. Ray thinks about it and explains that Humphrey's nickname is actually Silent Humphrey. They call him that because he's a quiet man that performs his duties perfectly, yet he's making a desperate expression, and it doesn't seem like he intends to deceive him. Ray asks what he wants, and Humphrey says he'd like for him to leave Sector 50. Ray asks why, and Humphrey says he needs to find his brother who Hector sold off to the City of Mages. Hector says that if he works under him for 10 years, he'll tell him where his brother is, and that's why he's been working with him. By now his brother should be around Ray's age, and Ray asks why he should even take on his request. Humphrey tells him that it's because Ray knows how to use magic, and he's sure of it after the fight in the warehouse. He shows his burned scar. He says even if he can use a little magic now, he won't be able to beat Hector. He always keeps a terrifying mage by his side. Ray can tell that he's genuinely terrified because the vessel is pitch black, which shows fear. He says that the mage is a demon. If any member dares to cross his mood, he'll freeze them whole. And he even drowned a guy once by placing a bubble of water around his head. He's an incredibly strong and cruel mage, and Ray should leave this place for now, as he has to survive in order to have a chance to take revenge. Ray says that he's right. He's never learned magic, and he's simply used it by intuition alone. On the other hand, his opponent is an expert, and as things stand, he has no chance of winning. He heard that the City of Mages is somewhere upstream of the Elton River. Humphrey says that they say only mages can enter that place. This is all the money I've saved up for my whole life. Inside is a slip of my brother's name and traits written on it. Ray asks why he isn't trusting him with this money, as he might not keep his promise. Humphrey says he knows him, and he's not one to break his promises. Plus, from what he's seen of him, he is skilled enough to go up against a sector of a high level. And knowing him, he can do it, and he's going to place his faith in him just like Niles did. Ray's looking at his vessel, and he can tell that he's genuine. Hector says the other members are going to be here soon, so he has to decide. Ray says he has a condition. He needs to take care of all the corpses at the underpass. Only then will he find his brother. Humphrey nods his head, agreeing, saying that he'll do his best. Ray tells him to wait for him as he starts heading out. He tells him that he will be back on the corner of 17th and 18th. We see him gas out, and he says that nobody is following him. He walks over towards Viola, and he tips her a coin, saying he has a question and he doesn't have time, so she needs to answer quickly. She asks what he needs, and he asks if the story about the rainbow is true, and if you find a rainbow, you'll be able to make a wish. He recalls Josephine talking about the rainbow in the sky, and when Ray asked what a rainbow was, Josephine was super happy, saying that it's a long, colorful band that appears when the rain clears, like a pretty colored donut with a bite taken out of it. If you find where it touches the ground, you'll be able to make a wish. Ray says that donuts are actually pretty gas, and Josephine tells him to pay attention. Ray says that he'll have to take care of everyone and get some donuts tomorrow. And Josephine says that's not it, calling him stupid. Ray stares at Viola, waiting for her reply, and she says they do exist. Whether or not you can make a wish, though, she doesn't know. Ray starts looking at her vessel, and he sees that it's a giant purple light. Again, he says there aren't any tremors in her mana, and it's clear like always. He can't tell whether she's lying or not, but it's not on any basis, as Humphrey says that the mage that came here was looking for something, and it was a rainbow. If that mage is looking for it too, he's sure that it means they have some kind of proof of the existence of rainbows, and he asks her if he finds one, if he would actually be able to make a wish and revive the dead. She smiles, saying, "Who knows, but they do say that you can make any wish come true if you do it." I'm unsure if he sees her light changing color or not, but she says that nobody knows where rainbows are, and it's likely somewhere very far away. He thanks her, and he tells her it would be good for her to move. On the outskirts of Sector 50, 23rd Street, we see Ray in an alley. This is the place that Niles wrote down on the paper, which is a blue abandoned building, and he spots the whip in front of it. Niles told him that he had a car prepared beforehand, and we see it's a 4-seater sedan. As he grabs onto the handle, somebody asks who he is, saying he looks like Niles' brat. He asks if he received orders to bring the car over and asks where Niles is. Ray says he thought he'd lost all of Hector's men, but he can't afford to waste any more time. He tightens his grip on the handle, and the Fentel demon realizes this and starts running at him, asking, "Where do you think you're going?" Ray quickly gets in, closes the door, but as he's going to close it, the junkie puts his hand on it, stopping him. He's got that druggy strength, and he yells, telling him to open the door. Ray is shaking, saying that he's used too much strengthening magic and his mana is giving out. He starts to imbue his hand with the red aura from last time, and he raises his 2 fingers towards the dude like he's about to blast. He then fires one quick, clean shot. The dude then starts to fall over, and Ray puts it into drive and slams on the pedal. He just murdered this dude, and he starts driving away. He says he's finally going outside of Sector 50 for the first time ever. He continues driving down the river. We see some birds on some rubble, and they start to fly away. He comes to a stop in the car and lifts the trunk, saying that with all of this, it looks like Niles was quite prepared, but he won't arrive in the next sector until the next couple of days at this rate. So, he makes a campfire, saying that he needs to find out more information on magic once he gets to the next sector. But what he does know at this point is that there are 2 types of mana. Red mana that you can use without any particular prep, and other mana that requires colors to be combined together. Mana cannot be easily manipulated, but if he channels certain emotions, he can utilize certain mana more easily. If he thinks of the feeling of losing his family members, it starts to boil up inside of him as we see it forming in his vessel. It even starts to flow out. He says that this is his maximum. If he loses concentration on the emotions, his mana slips away. He's now going to focus on combinations, as he starts putting his hands together, swirling the aura together. We see a nice variety of colors swirling around, then it breaks and disperses away, leaving him completely confused on the situation. He says mana types that aren't compatible repel each other. Combining different colors requires delicate effort, so it also takes a great deal of mental power, but in exchange, there are combinations that are bound to work well with each other, and he wants to continue combining. This wasn't necessary before, but things are different now. As he's looking up at the night sky, he sees an aurora borealis, and he says that now he has a reason to do so. He continues driving the next day and finds a nice rock to sit at and rest for the night. As he continues practicing combining his mana together, we see him creating ice on his fingertip, as well as a small wind tornado and even stones from his finger. He decides that this is enough and he should stop here. If he can hold mana in his vessel and use it when needed, that would make the whole process more efficient. Like the circles surrounding that mage's vessel, he wants to search for a way once he reaches Sector 49. Back at Sector 50, on 17th Street near the bridge where he lives, all the men are running around searching, and the mage asks if there's been nothing yet. One of the men apologizes, saying that if he waits longer, they'll find the golem. The mage tells him to hold the end as he points his cane towards the man. The guy looks horrified and apologizes, saying that he just needs more time. The mage says he doesn't like people who don't understand him. The guy looks horrified and slowly stretches his hand out, grabbing onto the cane, and it starts to grow up his arm as he screams in pain until he's completely frozen over. The mage then uses the cane to push him down onto the ground, shattering him into pieces, and he clicks his tongue, calling him useless. One of the men then yells, saying that there's something here, and it looks like the golem was in a fight. He then hands the mage a piece of the golem. The mage looks down, saying that there's mana lingering in the air, and a magic strong enough to still linger was used here. He can sense more lingering off to the side as well. He walks over and tells the man he has a question, asking if someone lived here. The man says the street children lived here before. The dude asks if orphans really lived here. The man says it was quite well suited for them, and they probably left to avoid the war. The mage wonders if an orphan could really use magic. He starts to smile, and even begins laughing, saying that there's no way an orphan of the streets used magic. Figuring out the infinitely small combination of elemental magic among the infinite combinations of the world is just straight impossible. He says it looks like another mage came here and destroyed the golem, and they need to figure out what happened. He's still smiling, saying that in the off chance that the impossible did happen, he must be a genius that could become an archmage like the world has never seen before. As Ray finally arrives at Sector 49, we get a flashback to Ray and Niles sitting at an inn. Niles takes a sip of his beer, saying that the 42nd sector is similar to this place, and it's a mess. If you were to mention a difference, it would be that it's larger than the 50th sector. The buildings are higher, and they have more streets. It's the same in the lower sectors. The further upstream you go, the more dramatic the changes to the scenery are. In the 49th sector, we see Ray saying that this place is gigantic. He's looking around, saying that it's so weird here, and there are no golems. Maybe they're only found in the 50th sector. He's walking through the city, overhearing people asking how the pay at the mines is, and laughing about it. He's at the 36th street and says that there are at least twice as many streets as the 50th sector. He needs to get a move on. He must find more information on magic as soon as possible, especially about that mage in his vessel circles. That'll be the key to him getting his revenge. He also has to look into the prismatic colors in the city of mages. He needs some money as well. He has the money that Humphrey gave him, but he doesn't know how long the journey will take. He lets out a sigh and looks up at Veronica's bookstore. He wonders what it means, saying that Veronica sounds like a person's name, but wondering what exactly a bookstore is. We get a flashback to when he was younger, when Niles was teaching him how to read. Niles drew letters on the dirt and taught him how to write brother, telling him to call him brother while poking him with a stick. Ray says this is the only reason he can read now. He's looking inside the bookstore, wondering what that is. He's never seen one before, and it's filled with squares, each one having its own little thing inside of them. A lady yells at him loudly, asking if he was the one who broke the window, and wonders if he's here to steal her books again. She angrily tells him to piss off, asking why he's doing this to them. She looks really flustered. He asks if these things are inside her books, and she tells him she's not going to repeat herself and to piss off. He sees all of the emotions from her vessel, pretty much every emotion, and he asks if it's possible to feel all of these at the same time. She says the adults are making their way down now, asking why he's still standing there, but he has no idea what she's on about. He calls her a weirdo. She then starts to get annoyed and barks at him, asking if he said what she thinks he did, then starts talking about her grandfather. He leaves, saying that now is not the time. He continues making his way down the city and looks to his left, spotting some slum kids. With where he gazes, he says he expected this since he's a stranger walking through the streets. They must think that he's here to provoke them, and so far, this much is no different from Sector 50. That night, back in his car, we see him laying down in the driver's seat, saying he's walked quite a lot but found nothing on magic. He'll need to search more areas tomorrow. He then hears something outside, and it's the kids we saw earlier. He says they're finally here, and now there are 4 of them. They get right up to the car window, wondering if they should kill him or not. They say they should just take him down, steal the car keys, and take all of his stuff. Ray tightens the grip on something and then swings it directly towards the kid with the red little hat, breaking through his car window. He smacks him in the face with it, causing him to fall to the floor as the rest scream. He quickly opens the car door, charging at the kid with the blue hoodie. Before he can react, Ray hits him in the chest with the same weapon. The kid's eyes start to fade out as he loses consciousness and falls to the floor. One of the boys leaps at him from behind, saying that he needs to die, but Ray easily catches him, and the kid falls to the floor screaming, saying that he shouldn't come near him. Ray starts swinging his weapon, telling the kid to clench his teeth. The kid looks terrified. The kid starts screaming as Ray smacks the piss out of him over and over. After a bit, they're all awake, sitting in front of him in a regretful pose. Ray asks how many streets they own. They don't answer him, and he barks at them, glaring, saying that they need to answer when he asks. One of the kids thinks about if he should answer or not, and Ray swings by his head. The kid immediately tells him they have 3 in total. Ray asks which ones and glares at the kid. He says the 23rd through the 25th, and Ray can tell the kid is feeling anxiety, uneasiness, and fear because he can see his vessel. He tells the kid he's lying and slams on his hand. He continues stomping it out until we see blood flying everywhere, and the kid apologizes, begging for forgiveness. Ray then walks over to the next kid glaring at him and says it's his turn to speak up now. The dude says he folded 5 minutes ago, and he'll tell him anything he wants. He says they have 14 streets and 52 members total. Their leader is named Kedrick, and their base is in an abandoned factory. Ray says they're way bigger than he thought and tells the kid to raise his head. The kid does so, and Ray asks for his name. He tells him his name is Neshu. Ray asks Neshu what orders his leader gave him, and Neshu responds that they were to beat him within an inch of his life and steal whatever food he had. Ray asks what else, and Neshu says their leader is watching everything. A kid leaps at Ray from behind with a knife, yelling for him to die, and Ray begins to release a blue aura saying that he sees, and he was the one who was watching him. Then he releases the aura, sending the kid flying backwards. The kid wonders why the wind is like this and why the dust is even starting to get into his eyes. With 2 quick strikes to the face and the chest, the kid immediately falls to the ground holding on to his face. Ray stands over him saying to tell his leader this. He grabs the kid by the hair saying that he's not the only one watching and starts releasing mad killing intent. Then he heads back into town, saying that just like in Sector 50, the people of Sector 49 don't know about magic. He's heard that books are bundles of paper with all kinds of information written on them. And if there are all kinds, then there are bound to be ones about magic. Somebody stands in front of him, calling out to him, saying that he needs to come with them, that they're not here to fight, so he should ease up. Ray asks if they're with the kids that came looking for him, the ones he beat half to death last night, and in quite a great fashion too. They say that's why their boss took a liking to him, since he's really good at fighting. They pull out a paper, but none of them know how to read it all, and they all look kind of confused. One of the kids says that he was supposed to tell them what's written on it, but it seems like they had an oversight in their plan. Ray takes it, saying that he'll read it himself, and they're surprised he knows how to read. He tells them it's only a little bit, and they wonder if maybe he's not from the streets if he knows how to read. The note says, "Come work for me and I'll make sure you'll never starve." They ask Ray what it says on the paper, and he instead asks them how they pick their leader. They ask what he means, and he says exactly what he asked. They say by fighting and the strongest becomes the boss. He says okay, and that he'll go with them. They ask where to, and he says to meet their leader, at Kedrick's group base in the abandoned factory. The kid tells him that it's right in here. He opens the door as they head inside. The door closes behind them, and we see a whole group of kids sitting and standing around their boss. Kedrick calls out, saying it must be him. Ray looks up as Kedrick stands, introducing himself and smiling towards him. Ray is surprised by something. He says there have been times when mana would flow out from junk, but he's never seen an object with that much mana before. Kedrick tells him to take a seat, saying he invited him here not as an enemy, but as a guest. All the men stand behind him, glaring at him, and some of them look hella pissed. Ray says it's very evident that Kedrick is trying to assert his dominance. He's around Ray's age, but his leadership is already this proficient. Kedrick says he likes him even more now that he's seeing him in person, and that he's got real nerves of steel. He asks where Ray is from, saying he heard he got over here with a car. Ray then tells him he's from Sector 50, and they all audibly gasp. They ask if he's lying, saying they've never heard of someone coming up from Sector 50 before. They have heard of people coming down from the other sectors though. Kedrick tells Ray that's enough yapping and says that if it's true, then it's pretty incredible, asking if he'd like to join their organization. Ray asks what he means by organization, and Kedrick says they're planning to join a real one here soon. The organization is named the Merc Red, a super famous group from Sector 45. They have an agreement to join their ranks once they have 66 members. Kedrick asks if Ray is okay with that, saying it's an opportunity to raise his status. Ray says it's quite an interesting story, and entering a group isn't hard. Kedrick tells him that's right and that it's a wise decision, but Ray says that he refuses to work for someone weaker than him. They're all surprised by his guts, and Kedrick starts to get annoyed, asking if Ray really is saying that he's weaker than him. Ray explains that back in Sector 50, everything was decided by strength, not by how well they could talk. Somebody runs in, taking this as an insult, and Kedrick grabs the guy by the throat, lifting him into the air, asking who told him to speak, saying that he knows he hates being interrupted. The guy starts to apologize, and Ray can tell just by looking at Kedrick that he is using strength magic, but it doesn't seem like he's using the magic himself. The ring is emitting the mana for it. Ray asks when this is going to end, and the dude tells him that it won't end until one of them does. Ray thinks that he can break the ring, and he raises his finger pointing at it, and somehow snaps the mana off of it. Kedrick looks at it but doesn't really react and laughs it off, saying that he got a little heated. Ray wants to test a sudden shift in emotion, and Kedrick walks back over, saying that they should continue where they left off, asking if he's really saying he's weaker than him. Ray says he is, and he's going to fold his shit like a lawn chair. Kedrick throws the table directly past him and starts yelling, telling him to say that again. He asks the rest if they also think that Ray is stronger than him, and they say no, that he's the strongest here. Ray says that the ring reacts to Kedrick's emotions, and seeing how he didn't react when the mana from the ring was cut off, he doesn't know what the ring is doing to him. Kedrick asks if he really wants to see his strength, and Ray says yes, that he wants to fight for the leader position. If he loses, he'll work for him. Kedrick says that they'll do it in 1 week at a time when everybody is watching them, including his guys and the other gangs too. That way, they'll be certain on who's stronger. He asks what Ray thinks. Ray says bet, but asks where he got that ring. Kedrick says that he'll find out if he defeats him, but obviously that's not going to happen at all. But he is in for a bad time. The next day, Ray's walking around the street wondering what exactly that ring is. He then starts to feel something closing in quickly behind him, and he turns, catching it before it hits him in the back of the head. We see it was a rock, and some kids with baseball bats as well. They laugh that he caught it, asking who gave him permission to walk around here. More appear in front of him, saying that he must be out of his mind. They say that he shouldn't think about running anywhere, as they run these streets and they'll fix his attitude. Ray tells them to shut up and to go ahead and fight him already instead of yapping. No matter where he goes, people keep picking fights with him, and it must be because word of his fight with Kedrick is going around. Though Kedrick's gang isn't attacking him as instructed, that doesn't apply to the other gangs here, and allowing a stranger to walk around in his cave hurts their pride. Even the other gangs are forming alliances to keep him in check, but it's all going according to his plan anyways, so it doesn't really matter. His magic gets stronger the more he gets used to it, and as he gains more experience he casts spells faster unless metal power is consumed. Provoking fights was a good idea. Turning, he thinks that aside from that, he's curious how long somebody's going to watch, and he calls out to them on the side of the street. The kid seems hella nervous but walks out, and since he has gray hair and is expressionless, the kid assumes he must be the hunter, asking if he's right. He's a little small, and Ray points this out as well, saying that he's smaller than everybody else, yet he's going around alone, and it doesn't look like he's good at fighting, which is weird. He tells the kid to take his glasses off because it's going to hurt his hands when they break. The kid tells him to wait, saying he's not here to fight at all. Ray's confused, and the kid spots this, telling him that he's not a fighter, and asks how he would fight with his scrawny body anyways. Ray asks what business he has with him, then the kid looks anxious but tells him that his name is Philip, and that he has an offer for him. He starts following Philip, and Philip says that he works by the Easton garbage dump, and he's heard a lot of rumors about the hunter. Wherever he goes, they're all he talks about, and the hunter is a nickname he's earned after crushing those guys as a stranger in this place. They continue walking for a bit, and Philip says they're finally here as they stand before a warehouse. He then opens the door super happily, showing that they have a full-blown little society going on here, and nobody's even hostile. Ray is just surprised. It's huge, and he says that he would like to welcome him to Philip Hotel, and that he's the owner here. Ray says there's over 100 people here, and Philip says, to be more accurate, there's 186, including the guys working outside. Ray says that everybody here has something in common, and Philip says that he sure did notice early. Ray says it would be hard for them to join any other group, and they're all either very young or have small builds. Philip says that he sure does have a sharp eye. They have lots of mines in Sector 49, and Ray asks if that means a lot of adults die. Philip says that it seems that he's pretty smart too, and that's right. Because of that, there's a ton of work to do, and shops are willing to hire even children. There are too many for even the groups they're managing the streets to handle. So in exchange for holding a monopoly over work with a couple of groups, they've agreed to pay them a small bribe and send them workers if they need any. And he's sort of a broker around here, and even provides shelters. Ray asks if he created all this on his own, and Philip says of course, and that he worked very hard to set up all this infrastructure. Someone then calls out to Philip and runs over, and his name is Jonathan. Philip asks him how the restaurant job is doing. He says it's going great, and no one's bullying him when he goes to work, and he gives him next month's rent. Philip says thanks, and now he's confirmed it, and Jonathan walks off, waving bye to him. Philip opens up his notebook and sees Jonathan's name and writes in that he actually collected his rent already, and he apologizes to Ray, who looks curiously and says that he just had to do this instantly. He says that this is a notebook related to hotel management, and he could look at it since he seems pretty curious, though he might not get it even if he does read it. Ray grabs it anyways, and starts flipping through the pages and looks until he finds one that has the hunter on it. It says rumors that he came from Sector 50, he's living in a car, and I approach him carefully, and it's even highlighted in red. Ray says it seems that he's investigated him a lot, and Philip's surprised that he can read, and Ray tells him just a bit. Philip apologizes to him and looks worried. He says it's not an excuse, but he likes observing people, so he would like if he would look this over. Ray says that he's the exact opposite of him, and he doesn't get it even if he tries, and there's no need to apologize, as it doesn't bother him anyways. Philip seems relieved, and then a bit later, he tells him they're here and introduces him to two guys. One of the dudes is surprised, calling out to Philip, asking who he is, saying that they can't just let anyone into this area. He says that he's the hunter that everybody's been talking about, and he told them before he would bring him over as a guest. They head inside, and Philip says that he uses this place by himself, and he should make himself at home and take a seat. Ray says that when he first introduced him to this place, he thought he was a con man. Philip tells him not to worry. If he does not lie, credit is the most important thing in business and that he can always earn back money. But once he's lost credit, he'll have a hard time earning it back. Ray says that he doesn't seem to be around his age at all and asks him what it is because he mentioned a proposal to him. We see Philip shaking, saying that he's still a little scary, but he has to overcome that if he wants to profit here. His eyes light up golden, which could show joy or excitement, and he tells Ray he has a genuine proposal for him to become his business partner once he has beaten Kedrick and become the new leader, that is. They sit there for a bit, and Ray starts to look at him, saying that he is less black mana than before, and he was scared of him, but now he's brimming with courage. Ray asks if he doesn't think he's going to lose, and Philip says that he can't exclude that possibility, but he has a high possibility of winning. Ray asks why that is. Philip says that it's just a hunch he has. He told him before that he likes observing people. If he watches a person's behavior and habits closely, he'll get an idea of what they're like. For example, when he speaks to people, he has a habit of lowering his gaze, and he looks at people's chest instead of their eyes. He's right, and Philip says he doesn't know why though, and he wonders if he has some kind of trauma regarding people's eyes or faces. Then he gets back to the point. He's a good eye for people, and he can tell him, but Ray cuts him off, asking if there's anything else and what the habits of his are that he has noticed so far and how many of them. He says there's a couple more, and Ray says he wants to hear about them. Philip says he always steps with his right foot when going around a corner, and perhaps it's because he's subconsciously preparing for the possibility of encountering an enemy since he's right-handed. Also, the way he fights. Ray says it's his first time hearing such a detailed, specific analysis. Up until now, people viewed him superficially, and that everybody always said that he was super scary, and there was something not right with him, and that he just seemed off, and they saw him this way anywhere he went in Sector 50. Even now, aside from anger and sadness, he has to concentrate to feel emotions. He wonders why exactly it is that Philip feels like a hint to how he can grow emotionally. Philip says that Kedrick has a habit of getting caught up in his emotions when fighting. However, it feels like Ray fights while reading his opponent's movements, and he believes that's why his chances are higher. Ray just cuts him off by saying he accepts, and Philip says he hasn't even finished explaining yet about payment or anything else. Ray says he can figure it out himself, and he should not take it lightly. Philip smiles and laughs. That is a given, of course. But Ray says he has a condition. Philip wonders what it is and looks nervous, and Ray says it seems he has a lot of connections here, and he needs him to find something specific for him. We get a time skip to 2 days later, and Ray is sitting by his car as someone is working underneath it. The mechanic asks if it's true he's from Sector 50, saying that looking at the state of his car, he'd believe it if Ray said he crossed the desert. He also mentions that it looks like Philip has taken a real liking to him, and he rarely sends out someone as skilled as himself. Ray stays silent, just watching the mechanic, then asks if he could pass him a wrench and a 6mm nut. Ray looks down at them on top of the box, raises his finger and uses mana to move the nuts and wrench over beside the mechanic. The mechanic looks over, confused, asking if it was always there or if Ray brought it. Ray, of course, stays silent. After a moment, the mechanic laughs, saying it's all done. Aside from the engine overheating, there wasn't much to fix. He replaced the coolant with something much better, so it should be fine now. He secretly brought it from the shop he works at. It's the most expensive one. Ray says, "Good job." The mechanic laughs, saying it was just a request from Philip and Philip is his savior. If it weren't for him, he wouldn't have been able to get any work to begin with, which is why he has no complaints about paying Philip a portion of his income. Ray says that Philip is surprisingly popular. The dude then says that Philip asked for him to hand him this, and he said it would be hard to memorize the whole message, which is why he gave him that paper. He then waves goodbye, saying that he'll see him again, calling him the Hunter. Ray looks down at the paper, and we get a flashback to a couple of days ago when he said that he needs information about mages. Philip says he's heard about them before, and he'll gather information about anyone that's even the least bit suspicious, and it shouldn't take too long, saying that he has a bit of an information network inside of Ray's car. He's sitting there, saying that he didn't think he'd be able to acquire this much info in a couple of days. He starts reading it all out, but of course I ain't reading all that, and if any of it's important I'll point it out. So far, Ray doesn't seem that interested, and then he spots one that catches his eye, saying that this one would be worth confirming. We see a dude carrying 2 giant boxes on his shoulders as he's walking down the street. Ray watches him, saying that Lennon is excluded, as it does not have a ring on his chest, and it leaves only one person left when a pipe fell from above due to an accident directly towards a man who was often seen around the area. The pipe seemed to have been hit by a strong gust of wind, and he narrowly avoided the incident, and he did not appear surprised in the slightest. There's a high likelihood that the man is a mage. Ray comes out of the alley and looks up, surprised to see that he's back in Veronica's bookstore, and some kids are saying that it seems like they're closed today, that they're not going to open at this rate, and that they should be able to hold out. It turns out they're the ones throwing the rocks, and they say that if they stop here, their job will be done. They continue arguing, and apparently, someone said that they'd pay them double if the store goes for sale. They can't stop here, and they'll throw them up the 2nd floor this time since it's not just their store but their home, and they'll force them to move out. The kid raises the rock up, saying that he wants to show them how it's done. We see the girl from before open the door, saying that they need to go away already, that she heard everything, and that they were the ones throwing the rocks. She tells them they better just leave, calling them bastards. Ray says that light yellow is courage and conviction. However, seeing how it's filled with black mana as well, she seems to be quite frightened. The kids ask if she thinks they can't see her shaking in fear, saying it must be nice having a house since they don't have anywhere to sleep. She does seem to be shaking, and she says the adults are going to do something about it. But before she can finish, they throw the rock right beside her head, causing her to scream. They laugh at her, saying that they know there's only some old people and kids in there, and that they should just shut up and move out already. Ray watches from the corner, and then one of the kids gets a rock directly toward her face, saying that this time he wants to hit her straight on. Ray goes to stop her but is surprised as he sees the light blue mana from her hands. As she stretches them out, she sends out a bunch of blue gusts of wind, knocking the rock back. They ask, "What the hell was that just now?" And we see the mana emanating from her hand. She looks flustered about what just happened, and Ray realizes he found himself a mage. The kids say they must have imagined it and should try again. But Ray says no, that was clearly magic. The girl's starting to tear up, telling them to get lost already. They say she's only pretending to be tough and start throwing even more rocks at her, saying she can't do anything from there. As the rocks fly directly towards her face, she closes her eyes, saying that she can't block all of them. Ray stretches his hands up towards her, releasing his own blue mana. A strong gust of wind activates, knocking the rocks away, not just onto the floor like she did before, but straight into one of the kids' faces. The other kid turns, wondering what's going on and if his friend is okay, but he catches a straight as well, straight to the dome. They both start crying, and Ray exits the alley, tossing a rock up into the air. While the kids are shaking, he looks up at her, saying, "It's been a while," and she's just surprised. A bit later, we see the kids beaten up inside of an alleyway, and the girl thanks Ray for helping her. He says there's no need, but there's something he wants to ask. She says she was curious too, and at the exact same time, he asks if she's a mage, and she asks if he used magic. They both realize they asked something almost identical. She clears her throat, asking if he wants to go inside and talk. He enters the bookstore and looks around. She tells him that she is actually Veronica, the child of this bookstore. Ray tells her his name, and she says she sees and apologizes for yelling at him last time. She thought he was one of the kids throwing rocks. He says he understands, and the situation allowed for a misunderstanding. She looks embarrassed, thanking him for helping her, saying that she would be in big trouble without him. He says there's no need to thank him that much. He just wanted to take a look around the bookstore. He had only wanted to obtain some magical knowledge, but meeting a mage here was a bigger gain than expected. She's surprised, saying that people are usually more receptive to appreciation here, and he sure is strange. Ray asks Veronica where she learned magic, and she says her grandpa took her and her siblings in. He asks if her grandfather can also use magic, and she says, of course, since he's a mage. Ray asks if he can meet him. She says that should be fine, but she'll have to go upstairs and tell him first. Then she notices a cut on his cheek and tells him to wait. He says it's only a graze, so it should be fine, but she tells him it could get infected if they leave it be. She walks over, placing her hand on his cheek, telling him to wait a second. She starts using icy magic this time, cooling it down, but it has more effect than that. The wound completely disappears. She's healed it. She lets out a sigh of relief, saying, all done. Ray asks her, how did that? She asks what he means, and he says she just moved white mana and used it to create light to heal him. No matter how hard he focused, he couldn't move the white mana at all. It only reacts when someone is considerate, dedicated, or when someone sacrifices themselves. All of those are emotions far from him, who is emotionally incapable. She says she used healing magic, and that's all, asking what he means by white mana. He recalls Niles telling him that before he was told that mana is invisible, and this confirms that mages can't see it. She says she doesn't know what he means by white mana, and asks if he means the element of regeneration. He says he has no idea what that is. She explains that the element used for the magic just now is called the element of regeneration. Usually, healing magic uses only one element, though you could add 2 more assisting elements. He asks how many elements there are, and she says, a lot, over 20 types if you just count the natural ones. If you count others, such as amplification, disturbance, and so on, there are at least 100 of them. Ray says that he's learned something new today, and maybe he would learn more if he meets her grandfather. He asks if he's on the 2nd floor, and she says he is, but he's really sick and can't get out of bed. She asks if he could just wait here for a minute while she checks if he's awake. She runs upstairs, saying that she'll be right back. Ray starts looking through all the books, reading their titles. He says that he heard books are all very expensive items, and touching them with his hands would only lower their value, so he stops himself. He thinks about it and realizes that the last time he took a bath was when it rained with clean water. He doesn't particularly feel discomfort when faced with a bad odor, but he's sure others do. Maybe Veronica has a very bad nose, or she's just tolerating him. He then notices different books on the table, saying that they seem more like journals. One is the study of elemental distribution by sector, and another one is the reason for the expansion of the black rain. She starts heading back downstairs but doesn't see Ray, wondering if he left because she took too long. He's right behind her, saying that he's still here. This scares her and she screams. She asks if he was looking around the store, saying she had no clue he was behind her. He asks if there are any books about magic, saying he looked around but couldn't find any. She asks if he can read and if he checked the book titles. He says he did, and she says that he's more interesting than she thought. He asks how her grandfather is, and she says that she doesn't think he'll be able to talk to him right now since he's asleep, asking if he could maybe come back tomorrow. She looks anxious. He says that he'll do that, and as he goes to leave, she then asks why he wants to meet her grandfather. It sounded like that was his goal from the start. He thinks about it, telling her that there's something he's searching for, and that is none other than the prism. At 4:30 p.m., we see Ray inside of a cafe, looking through the list again. Across from where he is right now is where the man who had the pipe drop on his head resides. Hopefully he can get some information related to magic, and the information is from Joni on. Joni arrives, telling him that his order is here. Ray is surprised by the coincidence. He says he didn't order these, and Joni says it's on the house. He must be the hunter, and he's a hero to the kids right now. Ray says all right, but he asks something he wants to know, and Joni says he can ask anything, even the storage password of this place too. Ray says maybe he shouldn't go that far, and he asks how accurate the man's schedule is. Joni says 100%, and during the last 3 months that he's worked here, he's seen that man come in and out of the basement of that building at the exact same time. He almost doesn't have to look at the clock thanks to him. Somebody yells, asking Joni why he's slacking, and Joni tells Ray that he's got to run. If he has anything to ask, just call him, and he starts heading off. Ray says that he still has about an hour, so he'll have to wait here for now. After a bit, he's cleared his entire plate, takes a sip of his drink and spots something. It's none other than the man from the note. Ray says that he has rings like that mage with a monocle, so he must be a mage as well. Ray runs out telling Joni, "Thanks for the food," and Joni says it was his honor to serve him. Ray says that the man leaves his house for about an hour, and he has to find clues about magic in this house during that time. He heads down into the basement, finding it locked as expected, but he can't turn back now. He needs to find a way inside. He starts to feel the mana reacting, swirling around, and the mana begins to flow into the keyhole. A gust of ice freezes over it, unlocking it. He asks how the hell he did that just now, but says he has to focus and can't think about anything else. He sees a garbage can with a bunch of crumpled paper. Thankful it's not what he was thinking. He says what's important right now is to find information about that mage. He starts reading a letter the man was writing. Something about the red bloodstone that he was given, getting stronger, and something about 66 orphans. Maybe this is the Red MC executive that Kedrick was talking about. Judging from the content of this letter, he has been booted out of the organization. Then Ray senses something, saying there's something right in front of him, releasing a red aura. He takes the lid off and sees a bunch of jewels. It's the same one embedded inside Kedrick's ring. This must be the red bloodstone from the letter. He says it's still the same mana, but unlike the mana in the air, this jewel can lure it all in much more smoothly. He wonders what would happen if he used magic with this thing. Thinking about it, he lights up a giant flame in his hand, the biggest he's ever created. He says this is also the reddest flame he's ever made, and it usually takes more time to cast magic. Then he hears footsteps and realizes the guy's back, even though it hasn't even been 15 minutes. The guy enters the room, muttering that he can't believe he left his wallet. He wonders if he's getting dumber as the days go by, and whether this is why the boss abandoned him. Then he mutters to himself in third person, revealing his name as Walter. Once this is done, he'll be able to return to the organization. Ray hides by the door. Walter says he has to buy more food than usual this time, so he won't have to go out for a while. Ray says now he's heading out and he'll have a chance to leave, but Walter stops, saying that there was something else he needed. He grabs onto the door frame, saying that he'll need some rat poison too, and starts grinning at Ray. Walter asks Ray if he really thought he didn't know he was hiding here, and Ray swings at him. We see blood actually fly as he's managed to cut him, but Walter stands his ground, calling him a bastard while holding onto his face. Ray distances himself, and Walter asks who he is, saying he thought it was an assassin from the organization. But yet it's just some kid, and the blood's now getting into his eyes. He asks how he even unlocked the door, and Ray charges directly at him. Ray says he'll subdue him and make him say everything he knows, and he rears his fist back, but is surprised to see that Walter has actually used strengthening magic and caught the blade with his bare hands, saying that bro done goofed and he should never ignore an adult like he has been doing until now. Walter wonders why the hell he's so strong as we see his hand shaking. But he distances himself from Walter once more and says just now he focused his mana into the hand he was holding the blade with, and he used magic to prevent getting cut. Walter pulls out his own weapon, saying he went easy on him, and now he's able to use his own weapon. Now he's going to rip his face apart, and he starts swinging at him. Ray thinks maybe he can use the same magic Walter just did. As Walter goes to swing down towards his head, Walter is absolutely shocked by something, asking how Ray can use that magic. Ray says he clearly remembers the color combination ratio that Walter just used. Walter is confused, saying that metallization is a unique magic that he invented, and yet somehow this kid just did it after seeing it once. Ray is still locked in and returns with his own attack, which Walter avoids, but Ray immediately goes for a follow-up, slicing his side, and this time it actually cuts. Walter looks pained. His blood starts to pour out of him. A bit later, he actually got cut up all over, and he laughs, saying that he was right and that the boss must have sent him here. He heard there was someone who could copy magic among the assassins, and Ray stabs his hand into the wall. And since the room is dark, he lowers his voice so he can hide his identity. He says he has many things to ask him, and that he should answer his questions from here on out. Walter says he never thought the rumored assassin would be this young though. Ray says he knows from experience that it's hard to have a proper conversation with this type, and if he can't get any information out of him, he might just eliminate him here. Walter continues laughing crazily, saying that he gets it, and he'll make sure the boss has no choice but to recognize his ability, and he'll just burn him to death. He starts to incinerate himself, creating a giant flame tornado inside of his house. Ray is surprised by this, and that Walter's act of burning his skin up as well as he's starting to char himself. He says that Ray should tell his boss that Walter the Blood Eye is going to pay him a visit soon, and of course, that's if he can make it out of here alive, and that his boss will regret abandoning him in the first place. Ray says that the mana is spinning the rings intensely, and because of that, the red mana is quickly dispersing throughout his body and his blood vessels. Now this is dangerous. If he had not protected himself with mana, it would have already been over. Walter raises his hands into the air, creating two giant flamethrower-like attacks, saying that he knows Ray is an assassin sent here to retrieve the bloodstones, and that he should try his best to kill him as he throws his hand forward, launching a fireball at him. Ray raises his hands as multiple different colors start to swirl around them, and he manages to block the attack, causing the fireball to explode and disperse in different directions. Walter laughs, saying that if he's an assassin sent to kill him, he better be able to use magic of this caliber at least. This continues, and Walter asks if he's just going to play defense, saying that he's going to run out of mana at some point. Ray says he can't get close to him because he's covered in flames, and this protection won't last long either. Then he notices something as Walter has put his hands together, creating an even stronger attack than before, asking what Ray thinks about this one. Ray says that he's not going to be able to block this, and releases his protection magic, saying that he needs to first focus on extinguishing the fire. Walter asks if he's out of his mind since he undid his protection magic, then looks beside him to spot a water droplet, asking what the hell is going on here since water is starting to swirl around him. He says he can't believe Ray is using two main magic types at the same time. Ray starts to coat his fist with and rears it back. Walter realizes maybe that he's not the assassin since he's using multiple elements, but it's too late as Ray punches forward, sending out his own vortex of water to extinguish Walter. Turns out he didn't burn himself, my brain just smooth. After a bit, we see water dripping off the floor as Ray is actually soaked in it. His nose also begins to bleed really badly, and he says that this is the after effect of using magic at its maximum mental capacity, and the firepower of that magic was incredible or incomparable. The mana ring moved very smoothly, and the speed of color mixing was faster, and Walter was really strong. He can't imagine how strong the mage with the monocle must be. Then, if Walter only had 2 rings, yet that other mage had 3, he knows he can't carry out his revenge at his current strength. However, with enough time, he will get much stronger. If he knew things would turn out this way, he would have grabbed all of the bloodstones, as he only managed to take a handful. The next morning at Veronica's bookstore, Ray starts to approach. She turns, glad that he's here, and she says that his outfit changed since he was wearing a raincoat yesterday. He tells her that he got rid of it, and we see he's all fresh and clean now. While Walter wouldn't have seen his face because the room was dark, he could recognize him if he wore the same attire. She says she told her grandpa about him, about how he used magic to help her, and that he's looking for the rainbow. He asks if she told him anything else, and she says no because he didn't tell her anything else. Ray then spots something to his left, 2 kids anxiously staring at him. When he makes eye contact, they get scared and close the door. She says they're her little brothers and her grandpa brought them from the orphanage he took in Malta and Gelfine. Ray asks if it was all to teach magic, and she asks how he knew that. He says he doesn't think there'd be any other reason, and she did tell him that she learned magic from her grandpa. She says that he's right and she can't believe she forgot. She then says that they're finally here and that her grandpa is inside. We learn that her grandpa's name is Grandpa. She says that she brought Ray, the one who helped her. Ray says he definitely does have the air of a mage around him, and Grandpa asks Veronica to sit aside for a bit. She says okay and closes the door while Ray takes a seat directly beside him. Grandpa says first and foremost, Ray has his gratitude. He heard that Ray helped Veronica chase those kids off, something he was supposed to do but couldn't because, as Ray can see, he's not in the best condition. Ray says it wasn't difficult at all, and looks down at his vessel. Seeing that Grandpa has 4 rings, which is much stronger than the mage he encountered before, he explains again the emotions based on color, and says that all these would be hard to experience at the exact same time. Therefore this is not mana, but rather colors engraved into his vessel. The numerous ripples and waves of emotions over the years have left their traces, making it hard to read emotions from his type. Grandpa says that nevertheless he heard Ray had many things he wished to inquire about. Ray says he's been searching for a mage for a while now, and Grandpa says he thought Ray was a mage himself. According to Veronica, he used magic quite skillfully. Ray says there are many things he doesn't know. Grandpa laughs, saying that Ray must be from somewhere else, and asks where he's from. Ray thinks about it, and Grandpa says he seems to have a long backstory. If he finds it hard to answer, then Grandpa just has one question and suggests they play a game. The winner of each round can ask the loser a question. As he starts to send out some mana, Ray reacts to it quickly. Grandpa says his reaction is quick, proof of his keen senses, and asks if he feels the mana between them right now. Ray says yes, not only can he feel it, but he can see the mana in his hand. Grandpa says his atmosphere completely changed and explains that each magic uses a different element. When elements meet, they can create new ones, and what's between them right now is the element of maintenance. That's the element needed for magic to maintain homeostasis without being impacted by external factors. Because of this homeostasis, it is also the most difficult to maneuver. Ray then asks about the element inside of it, which surprises Grandpa, who asks if Ray can feel two and not just one. Ray says yes because there is a gray inside that is much darker than the others. It's definitely two different tones of gray. Grandpa laughs, saying, "How could this be? There was no need for him to go through hundreds of orphanages." Ray identified the elements of maintenance and continuation immediately, something even a regular mage can't do in an entire lifetime. Grandpa says this is a cruel twist of fate, as he doesn't have much time left to live, and he's finally found a true talent. Ray asks for the name of the element beside maintenance, but Grandpa says it's no fun if he just tells him. He should win the game to figure it out. The game is simple. Right now, there exists a sphere made up of two different elements between them, and Ray has to try pulling it toward himself. Once it reaches someone's hand, they'll win. Grandpa says he often plays this game with Veronica and offers to place the sphere near Ray at the start for fairness. Ray knows it will be difficult to win against a much more skilled mage, but because Grandpa set a handicap, it's not impossible. He tells Grandpa that he's ready to begin. Grandpa sticks his hands up, saying it's time to start. Ray says all right, but before he can even react, mana is immediately pulled away from him, which startles him. It's so fast that he couldn't do anything, and now the sphere is sitting in Grandpa's hand. Ray is shocked by the speed, saying that this old man sure does have some hands. Grandpa starts to laugh, saying that he'll ask the first question, which is, who did Ray learn magic from? Ray tells him he's self-taught. Grandpa says Ray surprised him twice in a mere day. Ray asks if that's so rare, and Grandpa tells him he'll answer the question if Ray wins the game because that's part of the rules. Ray says that he would like to begin the next round. Then we hear Grandpa laughing, and we see Ray empty-handed as Grandpa has won this round as well. He says the outcome of this competition solely depends on one's capability to handle mana, and the number of circles does not matter. Ray thoughts he's just been giving out info about himself, and at this rate, he won't get anything out of Grandpa, so he needs to use a different method to win this. Grandpa says they should continue their game, and he puts the sphere between the two of them. Each of them starts pulling it back and forth as the air fights back around it. Ray starts to imbue his left hand with magic, and Grandpa can feel something different. Ray ends up winning, and Grandpa says he seems to have switched up his tactics. Ray says there is no rule against using his own methods. Grandpa says that's a pretty interesting perspective, telling Ray to go ahead and ask anything. Ray asks what mana is exactly, and Grandpa says mana is the most fundamental element that all things in the world are constituted of. One cannot see or touch it, but like lightning strikes, fire or hail, one can observe its movements through secondary phenomena. Additionally, a very small number of humans are born with the sensory ability to perceive mana. However, being able to sense mana does not mean being able to use magic. The talent for sensing mana and manipulating it are entirely different domains. Ray asks if by talent he means the ability to manipulate mana. Grandpa thinks to himself that this is a second question, but he lets it slide. He says correct. It refers to the ability to separate the individual elements that make up mana and combine them in the correct proportions. Generally, those who understand themselves well tend to have greater talent as mages. In a way, magic is a discipline of exploring one's inner self. There is a saying that goes, mana waves to those who are honest with themselves. Ray starts to think about the words, wondering what they mean. On the next game, as Grandpa starts to pull it back to him, it instead moves toward Ray, which surprises Grandpa. He says the element of maintenance is considered the hardest to handle, yet Ray is learning how to manipulate it by understanding its characteristics in real time. Ray sighs in relief, and Grandpa asks what his next question is. Ray says that he wants to know more about the rings that mages have in their hearts. Grandpa explains that they can be thought of as circles, vessels to contain mana. The mana in the air will accumulate automatically into the created rings, and after a single refinement, the element distribution in this process will differ depending on the constitution of the mage. Ray asks if that means the refining process makes mana easier to use than the one still in the air, and Grandpa confirms this, but says there's another important reason. Ray asks if it's fine to use mana in the air a few times. Grandpa says yes, but if done constantly, it will cause mana poisoning. Usually, the reaction comes immediately once a mage uses mana in the air. They may feel hazy, drowsy, uncontrollably laugh, or be unable to stop crying due to sorrow. Some may even experience heightened anger. The symptoms of mana poisoning differ between people, and once they pile up they can develop into a permanent mental disease. Ray starts to wonder if mana and emotions affect each other. Using unrefined mana makes the user hysterical, which explains why he was free from mana poisoning until recently. He couldn't feel emotions. Ray then asks if someone could utilize the mana in the air while being immune to mana poisoning. Would they have a great advantage? Grandpa says that's a unique idea, but he's never seen someone like that before. If such a person existed, they would be incomparable to mages who use refined mana. Since there is an infinite amount of mana in the air surrounding them, they would be unstoppable. Grandpa then asks Ray if he has a dream. Ray asks if he means the ones from sleep, and Grandpa clarifies that he means what he wants to do in the future. Ray says there is something he has to do. Grandpa asks what it is, and Ray says that there is someone he needs to kill and someone he has to save. These are his two goals at the moment. Grandpa says he's heard many people claim the former, but this is the first time he's heard the latter. Then he asks Ray if he would like to learn magic from him. Ray is surprised, wondering why a mage with 4 circles would want to teach an orphan from the streets. He doesn't understand his purpose and wonders if Grandpa wants something from him. Grandpa can tell what he's thinking and says that he does not want anything from Ray. Ray thinks for a second and decides he wants to do this, saying yes. Grandpa smiles and tells Veronica to enter the room. She says she wasn't trying to eavesdrop, and he says he knows and is aware of the kind of person she is. He tells her to take a seat. He asks if she remembers why he took Molta and Gelfine from the orphanage. She says it was to leave his knowledge as a legacy, and he says that's right. This is a part of his knowledge, so she must listen well. This is about the rainbow. He heard Ray was looking for it. The rainbow is a story that has been passed down since ancient times, and even now there are many who want it, the world searching for it. There are hundreds of theories regarding the rainbow, but they all converge at one point. The one who finds the rainbow can become a godlike entity, able to do anything. Ray and Veronica are both confused, asking what a god is. Grandpa explains simply. They are almighty beings that can implement everything and anything into this world. Ray says this must be why the mage was also looking for it. Veronica then asks about the rainbow, but they get interrupted by the glass shattering from a rock being thrown. It flies directly toward Veronica, who looks worried. Ray sticks out his hand and holds her by the shoulder, blocking the rock, but his hand gets damaged as the glass pieces stop moving. Veronica also looks at all the glass, realizing that it's not moving anymore, and that this is wind magic. She looks up towards Ray, and we see that he looks a bit annoyed. Even though he still has that emotionless expression, it's clear. He says that he clearly gave them a warning by making one of his arms useless, but they have no intention of stopping the request regarding the bookstore. As we see them running away, Grandpa thanks him, saying he saved them yet again and that he should be the one doing this, but he's physically incapable. He hopes Veronica can heal Ray's injury. She uses her magic on his hand and tells him it will be done soon. Ray is just confused, saying this is a small injury on someone else no less, and wonders if it's really worth shedding tears over. She tells him that it'll scar his skin if it's left untreated, but Ray thinks scars would be helpful as they're marks of honor from enemies of the past. That does sound pretty cool to him. Grandpa tells Veronica to refrain from utilizing magic before creating a circle, saying she's used the mana from the air too much. She nods, saying she understands. Ray says that they've been throwing rocks for a long time. Grandpa says it's been over a month since it started, and it's probably due to someone else's request. Someone kept making offers to buy the store, so it's highly likely to be their doing. Ray asks if Grandpa has no intention of selling the bookstore, and Grandpa says it's been his intention until now, but this is becoming unbearable. It was half a year ago when he opened this bookstore, meant to train his disciples, a place he put his life into. Veronica tugging on his shirt as she and the other kids congratulated him on opening the bookstore. He looked so happy. It was a super wholesome moment. He says he was quite satisfied with his lifestyle, able to meet children and welcome those who needed books. However, Veronica has been managing the store in his place due to his illness. If he were to die, things would only get worse, and there would be no easier prey than a store run by only children. Veronica freezes up and Grandpa says he'll have to sell the store and look for a suitable home. But Veronica yells no, saying he can't sell it. She starts shaking, saying this is where his dreams lie. He wanted to run a bookstore since childhood. Grandpa thanks her for her consideration but says that not all things work out the way we wish. She says she doesn't want to do it, tears rolling down her face, and she says she doesn't want to close down the store. More than that, she just doesn't want to see her grandpa disappear. We see how much she truly cares for him. Grandpa, touched, starts to tear up as well. She runs over, hugging him, and he says that he seems to have put too much of a burden on her. Ray stares at his vessel, wondering what that reddish-pink color is. Sometime later, the black rain begins, and Veronica explains that Grandpa's disease is called the eternal sleep disease. It began 2 months ago, and his sleeping periods will grow longer and longer until he never opens his eyes again. He can't move anymore and can only stay awake for 2 to 3 hours a day. She asks if Ray could come back tomorrow, as Grandpa is usually awake in the morning. A little later, she is glad that her raincoat suits his size, and she tells him that she'll see him tomorrow. Ray starts to recall Josephine crying. Though he can't relate to others' sadness, he knows a few words and actions to comfort them. He tells Veronica not to worry, as it will all go well. She's surprised by this, tears up again, and thanks him as he walks away. Out on the streets, Ray wonders where they went. The 8th Street, where the bookstore is located, belongs to the Jeffers gang, and those kids must be from there as well. He wonders if they all returned to their hideout because of the black rain. He's planning to take care of Jeffer, but it seems he has to modify his plan a bit. He starts making his way through a junkyard, saying he needs to look for Philip since he could maybe arrange a meet between him and Jeffer. Then he stops after he sees something. There are people watching outside a container. Ray wonders what Kedrick's gang is doing here, while they are just wondering if they'll be done anytime soon. As he looks inside, he sees Kedrick hitting someone, and it's none other than Philip, which startles him. Kedrick calls him an arrogant bastard, saying that looking at the likes of him makes his blood boil. Then he hears a man screaming outside. He wonders what's going on, and the door is then kicked open as Ray is holding one of the dudes by the hair. We see he's taken care of all the boys now, and he walks in, calling out to Kedrick. Kedrick is surprised and asks if Ray also has some business with this guy. Ray looks over and sees a bloodied-up Philip. He does not look like he's in good condition.